It began on a sweltering summer day in 1944, the sun beating down mercilessly on a collection of barbed wire enclosures scattered across the American Midwest, where hundreds of German soldiers, captured from the European theater, were held in what they had been told would be the harshest and most humiliating conditions imaginable. And yet as they shuffled into the courtyard that morning, expecting the relentless grind of hunger, discipline, and the monotony of captivity, they were instead met with a scene so bewildering, so utterly surreal that their eyes widened, their jaws slackened, and for a moment the weight of the war, the battles fought in freezing mud and blood-soaked fields, seemed to evaporate in the face of an experience that challenged everything they thought they knew about their enemy. For before them were tables laden with shimmering ice cream, perfectly scooped into delicate cones that seemed to defy logic in a place that should have been defined by deprivation, alongside glass bottles of Coca-Cola, condensation-forming rivulets that trickled down their smooth surfaces, cold and sweet, a liquid that seemed almost forbidden. Yet here it was, in abundance, offered freely to men who had spent months imagining only suffering, a gesture so inconceivable that whispers rippled through the camp, questions forming silently on every prisoner's lips. Why are they feeding us like this? Why are they giving us treats when the war has made everything bitter and cruel? And as they approached hesitantly, the reality struck them with a force that no textbook, no propaganda, no prior experience could have prepared them for. Because in this moment, in this small patch of sunlight and laughter amidst barbed wire and watchtowers, they began to sense that what they were witnessing was not merely an act of kindness, but a carefully orchestrated psychological experiment, one that would leave an indelible mark on their understanding of the enemy, the war, and even themselves, as each cone of ice cream was handed over with a smile, each bottle of soda cracked open with a cheer, and the guards, uniformly disciplined and watchful, displayed a warmth and civility that the prisoners had never imagined possible, causing a ripple of disbelief to surge through the camp like an invisible wave, making hardened soldiers pause, making them remember summers before the war, picnics with family, the first taste of sweetness as children, memories that were supposed to be buried under the rubble of conflict, only now to surface, clashing violently with the grim reality of imprisonment. And in that moment, even the most cynical among them could not deny the strangeness, the almost absurd generosity, which carried with it a subtle but unmistakable message. The Americans were demonstrating power not through fear, not through violence, but through the very human act of indulgence, a strategy so brilliant, so confounding, that it forced the prisoners to confront a new kind of warfare, one fought in the realm of perception, psychology, and unexpected pleasure. And as they tentatively tasted the creamy sweetness, sipped the effervescent liquid, and exchanged uncertain glances with men who were supposed to be their enemies, the initial shock began to blend with curiosity, creating a tension that pulsed through the air like electricity, compelling them to wonder, to question, to reassess everything they thought they knew about captivity and about the people who held them. And it was in that suspended moment of disbelief that the narrative of the entire camp, the story of what it meant to be a prisoner in a foreign land, started to twist and turn into something almost unrecognizable, an experience that would be recounted in diaries, letters, and post-war memoirs with a mix of astonishment, gratitude, and incredulity, as the prisoners grappled with the paradox of their situation, locked behind fences, deprived of freedom, yet unexpectedly treated with a generosity that challenged the very logic of wartime cruelty. And as the hours unfolded, the courtyard became a theater of small wonders, where laughter erupted over shared cones, where Coke bottles passed from hand to hand like precious artifacts, where the monotony of imprisonment was punctuated by moments so vivid and so unexpected that the soldiers felt a strange shift within themselves, a loosening of tension, a rekindling of hope, or at the very least, a reminder that humanity could exist even in the shadow of global conflict, and with every passing minute, the story of these men and their improbable delight in simple pleasures grew richer, more complex, painting a picture not of surrender, but of the profound cognitive dissonance that arises when expectations are violently upended. And in this swirling mix of skepticism, joy, and disbelief, The stage was set for a narrative that would unravel over days and weeks, revealing not only the strategies of the captors but also the resilience, adaptability, and humanity of the captives themselves. A story that begins with ice cream and Coca-Cola, but expands into a profound exploration of culture, psychology, and the unexpected ways in which even small acts of kindness can alter the course of perception. And as the sun arced across the sky, casting shifting shadows over the wire fences, every prisoner, from the youngest private to the most hardened officer, felt a strange and unfamiliar sensation, the dawning realization that the war was far more complex, far more human, and far more unpredictable than any manual, any propaganda, or any drill had ever prepared them to understand. And it was in that dawning realization, in that single bewildering courtyard, that the true story of what it meant to be shocked by ice cream and Coca-Cola in an American prison camp began. A story that would ripple outward, challenging assumptions, reshaping attitudes, and leaving a legacy that would be recounted for decades. A story that proves that even in the midst of global conflict, the smallest, most unexpected gestures can create a ripple effect of disbelief, wonder, and ultimately reflection. A story that begins with cones and bottles but extends far beyond them, into the hearts and minds of men caught between duty, survival, and the disarming power of humanity. A story that demands attention, engagement, and contemplation. And as the camera of memory pans across the faces of these prisoners, faces frozen between disbelief and delight, it becomes clear that what they are experiencing is not merely a taste of sweetness, but a profound, almost cinematic disruption of expectation, a moment that commands focus, that hooks the mind with the simplest of delights, a hook designed to ensure that every viewer, listener, or reader remains suspended on the edge of curiosity, compelled to watch, to learn, to imagine, to feel. Because in this one courtyard, in these first 10 minutes of experience, the stage is set for a journey through human psychology, history, and the surprisingly transformative power of ice cream and Coca-Cola, a journey that begins here now with disbelief and suspense, and promises in the coming points, revelations and surprises that will challenge everything the audience believes about war, captivity, and the unexpected ways that small gestures can create profound, lasting change. As the days unfolded within the sprawling network of fences, barracks, and watchtowers, the German prisoners began to confront the subtle yet relentless ways in which the American captors had constructed not merely a physical space of containment but a psychological environment designed to challenge every preconceived notion, every expectation carried from the battlefields of Europe. Because while hunger, fatigue, and confinement were constants in any prison camp, what these men now encountered was a bewildering juxtaposition of structure, routine, and indulgence, where orderly roll calls and strict schedules were interspersed with moments of unexpected leisure, where guards smiled politely rather than barked commands, and where the very rhythms of daily life seemed calibrated not only for discipline, but for the gradual undermining of hostility. And this created a cognitive tension that was both disorienting and compelling, for the prisoners could not reconcile the contradictions. They were treated as enemies, yet fed as guests. They were monitored and restricted, yet given opportunities for recreation. And they were deprived of freedom, yet exposed to small freedoms and pleasures that were utterly alien to their prior experience. And as each morning began with the clanging of bells, signaling the start of labor, exercise, or assigned duties, the soldiers found themselves navigating a landscape that was simultaneously regimented and nurturing, where the predictable routines of cleaning, maintenance, and manual work were balanced by access to books, newspapers, games, and even musical instruments. And in these moments of quiet engagement, the prisoners were forced to confront the complexity of their situation. Realizing that the Americans were waging a form of soft psychological warfare, a war not of bullets and bombs, but of expectation and perception, where the ultimate objective was not merely to contain, but to transform, to expose and to unsettle. And as they participated in these routines, the soldiers began to notice subtle patterns, the guards' meticulous attention to fairness, the meticulous provisioning of food that exceeded mere sustenance, and the opportunities for leisure and social interaction that, while seemingly benign, carried a cumulative effect on morale, mindset, and ultimately, the prisoners' understanding of their captors, and within the barracks, the dynamics among the prisoners themselves began to shift, because the shared experience of surprise, delight, and disbelief fostered conversations that ranged from the trivial to the philosophical, where soldiers debated the motivations behind American generosity, questioned the ethics of their own preconceptions, and reflected on the stark contrast between the brutality of war abroad and the civility encountered in captivity. And these discussions often unfolded late into the night, under the dim glow of lamps or through the faint light filtering through barred windows, as men recounted memories of home, of past battles, and of the peculiar juxtaposition of fear and pleasure, creating a tapestry of thought that was rich, complex, and sometimes contradictory. For while many could not entirely shed the indoctrinated view of the enemy, the repeated exposure to kindness, abundance, and fairness planted seeds of doubt, curiosity, and even gratitude, and these seeds germinated slowly, nurtured by daily experiences such as the unexpected quality of meals that included fresh bread, butter, and occasionally fruit, the careful attention to hygiene and medical needs, and the seemingly paradoxical combination of discipline and permissiveness, all of which fostered a psychological environment where the prisoners were continually reassessing assumptions, recalibrating expectations, and experiencing an almost imperceptible but profound shift in perspective. And the more they engaged with this environment, the more they became aware of the subtle lessons embedded within it, that generosity could coexist with authority, that human decency could exist even amid conflict, and that the lines between enemy and benefactor were not as rigid as wartime propaganda had insisted, and these realizations did not emerge in isolation, but were reinforced through communal activities, where prisoners were allowed to participate in sports, theatrical performances, or educational programs, each of which seemed designed not merely to pass time but to cultivate reflection, morale, and a growing recognition of shared humanity. And as they engaged in these activities, the men began to form tentative bonds with each other that transcended rank and prior hierarchy, creating a microcosm of society where cooperation, empathy, and creativity were encouraged alongside the adherence to rules. And within this microcosm, the prisoners experienced a unique form of tension, for the familiar instincts of suspicion, rivalry, and fear persisted, yet were challenged by repeated demonstrations of fairness, predictability, and unexpected pleasure, producing a psychological landscape that was simultaneously familiar and alien, comfortable and disconcerting, where every day presented an opportunity to test assumptions, confront biases, and navigate the complex interplay of authority, freedom, and humanity. And as the weeks passed, the cumulative effect of these experiences began to manifest in subtle behavioral shifts. Prisoners who had once been withdrawn or hostile started to engage more openly, to question prior assumptions, to explore the small pleasures offered, and to recognize that the power dynamics of captivity were not solely rooted in coercion or intimidation, but in the intricate orchestration of experience, expectation, and perception, and this realization was perhaps most evident during communal meals, where the same ice cream and Coca-Cola that had initially shocked them were now consumed with an awareness of their symbolic significance, where each cone or bottle represented not only refreshment, but a deliberate demonstration of the captor's capacity for controlled generosity. And as the prisoners savored these treats, they were simultaneously observing, analyzing, and internalizing the broader implications of their treatment, grappling with questions that ranged from the tactical to the philosophical, considering how such experiences might influence their own behavior, their understanding of humanity, and the broader moral complexities of war. And even the most hardened officers found themselves quietly reflecting on the dissonance between the brutality they had witnessed on battlefields and the civility they were now experiencing, a tension that was both enlightening and unnerving. And as they navigated these conflicting realities, the prisoners were unwittingly participating in an extended psychological experiment, one that would shape their recollections, attitudes, and narratives for years to come, producing memoirs, letters, and oral histories that consistently marveled at the oddity, complexity, and sophistication of the American approach. And as the camp routines continued, the prisoners' daily lives became a delicate balance of obedience, exploration, and reflection, where every interaction with guards, every meal, every moment of leisure, served as both sustenance and subtle instruction, gradually reshaping perceptions, softening rigid prejudices, and fostering a profound appreciation of human complexity. And by the time the first season began to wane, the prisoners had experienced a transformation not immediately visible, but deeply felt, a cognitive and emotional recalibration born from repeated exposure to kindness, fairness, and unexpected pleasure. And in this ongoing process, the camp revealed itself not merely as a site of confinement, but as a carefully constructed environment for reflection, learning, and psychological engagement, where ice cream and Coca-Cola were not indulgences alone, but symbols of a broader strategy, a tangible manifestation of the captor's understanding of human nature. And as the prisoners internalized these lessons, the stage was set for subsequent revelations that would further challenge assumptions, heighten suspense, and deepen engagement, ensuring that the story of these men, their environment, and their evolving perceptions would continue to captivate, surprise, and illuminate, forming the foundation for the next point in this intricate narrative of disbelief, adaptation, and the transformative power of unexpected human kindness. As the Americans' approach to captivity revealed that warfare was not only fought with weapons, but also with strategy, psychology, and the deliberate disruption of expectation, a lesson that would reverberate long after the camp gates had closed, long after the war had ended, and long after the soldiers had returned to a world that would never again seem quite so absolute, certain, or predictable. And in this realization, the prisoners encountered the profound paradox of captivity, constrained in body, yet liberated in mind, challenged in expectation, yet enriched in experience, a paradox that would continue to unfold in the coming days, weeks, and months, creating layers of reflection, astonishment, and suspense that demanded continued attention, engagement, and immersion, as every moment in the camp became part of a living, breathing experiment in perception, humanity, and the extraordinary impact of seemingly simple acts, ensuring that the story remained compelling, absorbing, and unforgettable. As the prisoners settled deeper into the rhythms of camp life, the initial shock of unexpected indulgence began to give way to a more nuanced awareness of the carefully orchestrated environment in which they were confined, where each event, each interaction, and each provision seemed to carry an underlying significance beyond mere sustenance or diversion. And it was in this context that small incidents began to accumulate into a narrative that was simultaneously astonishing, perplexing, and profoundly transformative. For one afternoon, during a routine inspection of the barracks, a group of soldiers noticed a commotion near the recreational area, where a makeshift theater had been established for the purpose of staging performances ranging from comedic sketches to musical interludes. And the curiosity among the prisoners was palpable, for such opportunities for creative expression were entirely foreign in their previous understanding of imprisonment. Yet as they approached, they were met with a scene that seemed almost surreal. Fellow prisoners, some of whom had never held an instrument or performed in public, were singing, playing, and acting with an enthusiasm that radiated a strange mixture of joy, apprehension, and disbelief, and the audience, consisting of both prisoners and guards, responded with laughter, applause, and encouragement, a reaction that further deepened the prisoners' cognitive dissonance. For the rigid hierarchies and animosities of wartime had been replaced, at least temporarily, by an environment where performance and expression were not merely tolerated but actively celebrated. And in witnessing this, the soldiers were forced to confront a complex web of emotions, ranging from amusement to embarrassment, from envy to admiration, as they observed comrades shedding the burdens of fear and suspicion, engaging fully with an unexpected form of human connection. And it was in this moment that the true power of the American approach became evident, for the simple act of fostering creativity had far-reaching consequences, encouraging cooperation, trust, and subtle forms of psychological resilience. And as days passed, these interactions extended beyond the theater, spilling into sports, educational sessions, and even informal debates among prisoners about philosophy, morality, and the nature of warfare, where previously unquestioned loyalties and assumptions were now subject to scrutiny and reconsideration, and every encounter, whether it involved sharing a meal, discussing news from the outside world, or learning a new skill, contributed to a growing awareness among the prisoners that the American strategy was not merely about containment, but about engagement, and that engagement carried with it both an implicit challenge to authority and an opportunity for personal reflection. And as the prisoners began to internalize this, subtle shifts in behavior became noticeable. Men who had once isolated themselves in silent defiance now sought conversation. Those who had harbored deep cynicism began to express curiosity, and the most stoic soldiers occasionally betrayed moments of vulnerability, revealing fears, hopes, and memories that had long been suppressed under the weight of war. And these revelations, though private in nature, were shared across the communal spaces of the camp, creating a network of understanding and empathy that transcended rank, nationality, and prior experience. And the psychological impact of these interactions was compounded by the Americans' unwavering consistency in treating the prisoners with fairness and dignity. For every rule, every expectation, and every provision was applied uniformly, leaving little room for the prisoners to justify resentment or rebellion on the basis of perceived injustice. And in this environment, the soldiers began to experiment with the boundaries of their own conduct, testing the limits of trust, cooperation, and self-discipline, while simultaneously observing the reactions of guards and peers, a complex interplay that sharpened their awareness, heightened their emotional intelligence, and created a form of engagement that was as instructive as it was disorienting. And as weeks turned into months, these patterns solidified, producing a rhythm of camp life in which each day carried the potential for both routine and revelation, where the predictability of schedules was offset by the unpredictability of human behavior, creating a sustained tension that kept the prisoners intellectually and emotionally alert. And within this tension, key turning points emerged, such as the arrival of letters from home, which were distributed with meticulous care and provided a tangible link to a world outside the barbed wire, offering both comfort and dissonance. For while the correspondence reminded the soldiers of life beyond the camp, it also heightened the contrast between expectation and reality, reinforcing the strange duality of captivity as both a site of constraint and a space for psychological growth. And as they read the letters, shared them with comrades, and reflected upon their content, the prisoners were forced to confront the paradoxical nature of their experience. They were enemies yet treated with civility, confined yet exposed to lessons in trust, morality, and the nuances of human behavior. Deprived of freedom, yet granted small freedoms and pleasures that demanded contemplation and internalization. And it was through this ongoing engagement that the prisoners began to develop a deeper, more sophisticated understanding of both their captors and themselves, recognizing that the American strategy relied not only on the provision of comfort, but on the careful cultivation of perception, expectation, and response, creating a psychological landscape in which curiosity, skepticism, delight, and reflection coexisted in dynamic tension. And in this environment, even the most mundane events, a shared meal, a discussion about news from the front, a game of soccer, took on amplified significance, offering insight into character, resilience, and adaptability, while simultaneously reinforcing the unpredictability and subtlety of the captor's approach. And as the prisoners navigated this complex web of experiences, their internal narratives began to shift, with initial disbelief giving way to cautious acceptance, skepticism evolving into curiosity, and resistance softening into engagement. A transformation that was rarely linear but consistently cumulative, with each event, each interaction, and each provision serving as a building block in an intricate psychological architecture designed to educate, challenge, and ultimately reshape understanding. And as the prisoners became more attuned to this architecture, they began to anticipate and interpret subtleties, such as the timing of recreational activities, the selection of meals, and the measured enforcement of rules, recognizing that each element was deliberate, contributing to a broader strategy that blurred the line between captivity and instruction. And in doing so, they were participating in a form of experiential learning that was at once bewildering, instructive, and transformative, a process that demanded sustained attention, reflection, and adaptability. And as these realizations took root, the prisoners developed a heightened awareness of themselves, their environment, and the human capacity for both generosity and manipulation. And this awareness catalyzed a series of internal dialogues, self-examinations, and discussions among peers, where assumptions were challenged, expectations reevaluated, and new understandings negotiated, creating a rich tapestry of psychological engagement that extended beyond the immediate confines of the camp and into broader reflections on morality, power, and the complexity of human relations. And as the prisoners progressed through this period of adaptation, the subtle interplay of trust, observation, and participation became increasingly evident, revealing the nuanced brilliance of the Americans' approach, where every gesture, no matter how small, served multiple functions: maintaining order, demonstrating fairness, fostering reflection, and subtly guiding perception. And as the prisoners absorbed and reflected upon these lessons, they were continuously confronted with the paradoxes inherent in their situation, experiencing the simultaneous discomfort of confinement and the enrichment of engagement, the tension of suspicion and the relief of understanding, the challenge of expectation and the delight of surprise. And through this ongoing, immersive process, the camp became a living laboratory for the study of human behavior, resilience, and adaptation, a space in which ice cream, Coca-Cola, recreational activities, and consistent fairness were not mere indulgences, but integral elements in a profound, multi-layered strategy of psychological engagement, producing an experience that was simultaneously educational, transformative, and deeply engaging, ensuring that every participant, prisoner and observer alike, remained intellectually and emotionally invested, and setting the stage for further revelations, unexpected events, and dramatic turning points that would continue to challenge assumptions, heighten suspense, and sustain the audience's engagement through the unfolding narrative, illustrating not only the ingenuity of the captors, but the adaptability, curiosity, and resilience of the human spirit in circumstances that defy expectation, logic, and prior experience, and in doing so, point 3 solidifies the foundation of the narrative, deepening the immersion, suspense, and psychological complexity, while compelling continued attention to the unfolding story, ensuring that every detail, interaction, and reflection contributes to a rich, absorbing, and unforgettable exploration of captivity, culture, and the subtle, transformative power of human kindness. As the weeks turned into months, the prisoners began to notice that the rhythm of camp life, while comforting in its consistency, also concealed subtle challenges and moments of tension that tested not only their patience, but their understanding of trust, loyalty, and resilience. For one afternoon, during what appeared to be a routine inspection of the camp's perimeters, a sudden alarm pierced the usual hum of activity, sending prisoners and guards alike into heightened alert. And though no immediate danger materialized, the incident created a ripple of unease throughout the enclosures, reminding everyone that even amidst the generosity, structure, and unexpected delights, the shadow of war and confinement remained ever present. And as the prisoners returned to their barracks, they engaged in whispered debates and cautious speculation, trying to interpret the significance of the alarm, questioning whether it was a test of discipline, a signal for some unannounced inspection, or simply a procedural precaution. And in these moments, the tension was compounded by the intricate social dynamics within the prisoner community itself. For differences of rank, personality, and prior experience inevitably led to friction, with some men advocating strict adherence to rules, others pushing the boundaries of permissible behavior, and still others navigating the delicate balance of cooperation and self-preservation. And it was within this intricate web of internal and external pressures that the prisoners' capacity for psychological adaptation was continuously exercised, as they learned to read subtle cues, anticipate possible outcomes, and modulate their own behavior in response to the nuanced environment. And amid this ongoing process, seemingly trivial events began to take on disproportionate significance, such as the timing of meal distribution, the allocation of recreational equipment, or the way in which orders were communicated and executed, each of which provided insight into the captor's expectations, intentions, and strategic design. And as these insights accumulated, The prisoners began to develop a sophisticated, almost intuitive understanding of the camp's operational logic, allowing them to navigate challenges more effectively, anticipate potential conflicts, and cultivate a sense of agency within the constraints imposed upon them. And yet, despite this growing awareness and adaptability, moments of surprise and unpredictability continued to punctuate daily life, reinforcing the tension between expectation and reality and ensuring that the prisoners remained mentally and emotionally engaged, for it was precisely this interplay of control and uncertainty that underscored the captors' approach, leveraging both discipline and unpredictability to shape perception, behavior, and morale. And within this framework, several dramatic incidents emerged that would leave an indelible mark on the prisoners' experience, including confrontations between individuals, unexpected inspections, sudden changes in routine, and the occasional intrusion of news from the outside world, all of which served to challenge assumptions, heighten alertness, and maintain a sustained level of psychological engagement. And it was during one such period of heightened tension that the prisoners were introduced to an entirely new dimension of camp life. Collaborative projects designed not merely for entertainment or diversion, but for the cultivation of critical thinking, problem-solving, and cooperative effort. And these projects ranged from the construction of functional camp facilities to the organization of theatrical performances, educational sessions, and recreational leagues, each of which required the prisoners to navigate the dual pressures of adherence to rules and creative problem-solving, fostering a level of engagement, accountability, and reflection that was entirely foreign to traditional expectations of imprisonment. And as they participated, the prisoners encountered challenges that were both logistical and interpersonal, requiring negotiation, compromise, and careful management of relationships, skills that, while seemingly mundane, carried profound implications for their psychological resilience and capacity for adaptation. And as these projects unfolded, the captor's role shifted subtly from enforcer to facilitator, providing resources, guidance, and oversight, while allowing the prisoners to take initiative, make decisions, and assume responsibility for outcomes, a strategy that reinforced the perception of fairness, cultivated a sense of ownership, and simultaneously tested the prisoners' capacity to navigate freedom within constraints. And through repeated engagement in these structured yet flexible activities, the prisoners began to experience a complex spectrum of emotions, including pride in accomplishments, frustration at setbacks, camaraderie and collaboration, and curiosity regarding the underlying motivations of their captors. And it was precisely this complex emotional landscape that rendered the experience both transformative and compelling. For each event, interaction, and challenge was carefully calibrated to maintain tension, encourage reflection, and sustain engagement, ensuring that the prisoners remained active participants in their own psychological evolution. And as the months progressed, the cumulative impact of these challenges became increasingly evident, manifesting not only in behavioral adaptations but also in shifts in attitude, perspective, and interpersonal dynamics, as prisoners who had once been rigid, cynical, or withdrawn began to demonstrate flexibility, empathy, and curiosity, gradually forming networks of mutual support, shared understanding, and collective problem-solving that transcended prior divisions of rank, nationality, and experience. And these networks, though informal, became critical to the prisoners' navigation of the camp's complex social and psychological terrain, providing both practical assistance and emotional reinforcement. And in observing and participating in these networks, the captors reinforced subtle lessons regarding cooperation, accountability, and resilience, while maintaining the necessary structures of authority and discipline. And as the prisoners absorbed these lessons, they were repeatedly confronted with moments that tested their evolving understanding, such as unexpected inspections, sudden changes in routine, the arrival of new prisoners, or news from the outside world, each of which required recalibration of expectations, reflection on prior assumptions, and adaptive response, reinforcing the dynamic interplay between stability and unpredictability that characterized camp life. And it was within this interplay that the prisoners' capacity for critical observation, psychological resilience, and adaptive behavior was honed, preparing them for subsequent experiences that would further challenge, surprise, and engage them. And as these experiences accumulated, a pattern emerged. one that underscored the captor's deliberate orchestration of environment, expectation, and interaction. By blending moments of challenge, surprise, and structured engagement with consistent fairness, predictability, and subtle rewards, the Americans had created a setting in which the prisoners' minds were continually stimulated, their assumptions tested, and their capacity for reflection nurtured, producing a sustained psychological tension that was both engaging and transformative. And within this context, every incident, from minor disputes to collaborative achievements, every provision from meals to recreational resources, and every interaction, from casual conversation to formal instruction, contributed to an intricate mosaic of experience that demanded attention, reflection, and emotional investment, ensuring that the narrative of captivity remained compelling, suspenseful, and deeply instructive, a narrative that would continue to unfold in subsequent points, revealing the nuanced brilliance of the American strategy, the resilience and adaptability of the prisoners, and the extraordinary power of structured engagement, subtle challenge, and human kindness to transform the ordinary experience of confinement into an immersive, unforgettable journey of perception, learning, and psychological evolution. A journey that would leave a lasting imprint on both prisoners and the historical record, illustrating that the most dramatic turning points in human experience often arise not from violence or coercion, but from carefully orchestrated, unexpected, and psychologically profound interventions, a lesson that resonates far beyond the barbed wire fences of a Midwestern American prison camp, and that would continue to captivate, engage, and astonish every observer who witnesses the unfolding story of ice cream, Coca-Cola, and the extraordinary capacity of human ingenuity, empathy, and resilience to transform even the most constrained circumstances into a theater of profound psychological insight, dramatic suspense, and unforgettable engagement, ensuring that the audience remains riveted, invested, and fully immersed in the narrative as it progresses toward even more extraordinary revelations in the subsequent points of the story. As the months of captivity approached their zenith, the prisoners had by now become acutely attuned to the rhythms, surprises, and subtle strategies embedded within their daily lives. And it was in this heightened state of awareness that the Americans orchestrated a series of events that would crystallize the paradoxical, transformative nature of the entire experience for one crisp morning. The camp erupted with activity as the prisoners were summoned to participate in a large-scale festival, a celebration that seemed at first incomprehensible in its scope and intent, where tables groaned with an abundance of food, from freshly baked bread to ice cream in quantities that defied imagination, alongside chilled bottles of Coca-Cola, and where games, musical performances, and contests of skill filled the air with laughter, cheer, and a sense of energy that was entirely foreign to the world of wartime captivity. And as the prisoners took in the scene, a palpable tension arose, a mixture of disbelief, curiosity, and guarded excitement, for the spectacle challenged every expectation they had formed over months of observation. And yet it was precisely this tension, the interplay of anticipation and uncertainty, that magnified the psychological impact, compelling every soldier to engage fully, observe keenly, and reflect profoundly on the meaning of generosity, freedom, and human connection within the confines of imprisonment. And as the festival unfolded, subtle lessons emerged. Cooperation and creativity flourished under structured freedom. Trust could be earned and exercised without compromising discipline, and the smallest gestures, like a shared cone of ice cream or the laughter elicited by a well-executed joke, carried profound implications for morale, perception, and the recalibration of assumptions. And amid the joyous chaos, the prisoners experienced a series of interactions that revealed not only the ingenuity of the captor's approach, but also the depth of their own psychological transformation. For men who had arrived steeped in suspicion, hostility, and rigid expectation now engaged with one another and with their captors in ways that reflected curiosity, empathy, and a newfound capacity for reflection. And as evening fell and the festival reached its crescendo, a dramatic announcement was made. The camp would be hosting a simulated exercise, a series of challenges that combined problem-solving, strategy, and physical skill, designed to test both individual initiative and collective coordination, And as the prisoners approached the exercise, the tension heightened to a nearly unbearable degree, for the exercise was framed as a game yet carried the implicit weight of performance, observation, and consequence, demanding that every participant draw upon the months of psychological adaptation, observation, and learning to succeed. And in this crucible of suspense, men confronted fears, insecurities, and competitive instincts that had lain dormant, producing moments of astonishment, exhilaration, and subtle self-realization, as successes and failures alike illuminated the profound interplay between expectation, action, and reflection. And when the exercise concluded, the prisoners gathered once more in the central courtyard, exhausted, exhilarated, and brimming with the emotional resonance of the day, only to be met with a final astonishing gesture: a distribution of ice cream and Coca-Cola, accompanied by a speech that emphasized fairness, recognition, and the humanity that transcended conflict. And as the prisoners consumed these treats, their minds raced, grappling with the paradox of experiencing abundance, celebration, and encouragement while remaining physically confined, realizing that they had been participants in an intricate orchestration that challenged every assumption about captivity, power, and human behavior. And it was in this culminating moment that the full psychological impact of the American strategy became evident. For the prisoners experienced a simultaneous flood of disbelief, gratitude, amusement, and reflection, understanding in a single profound instant that the simple gestures which had seemed absurd, indulgent, or even manipulative were in fact part of a deliberate design to transform perception, nurture resilience, and cultivate insight. And as they looked around at their fellow prisoners, faces glowing with delight, astonishment, and tentative camaraderie, they grasped the extraordinary paradox of their experience: confined in body, liberated in mind, deprived of freedom, enriched in perception, subjected to authority, yet guided with fairness and subtlety. And as this realization took hold, the suspense reached its zenith, a final hook that left every soldier, and by extension every observer of the story, suspended on the edge of comprehension, compelled to reflect on the profound implications. For the culmination of months of structured surprise, kindness, challenge, and engagement revealed not only the ingenuity of the captors, but the extraordinary adaptability, resilience, and humanity of those who had endured. And in this climactic convergence of events, every aspect of camp life, the meals, the ice cream, the Coca-Cola, the games, the education, the performances, the rules, the challenges, was revealed as part of a coherent, transformative experience, producing a narrative that is at once astonishing, deeply instructive, and emotionally resonant. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the barbed wire, a final hush fell over the courtyard, a pause pregnant with meaning, for the prisoners, standing amid the remnants of the festival, felt a strange and unforgettable sensation, a suspended moment of disbelief and awe, where the enormity of what they had experienced, the paradox, the lessons, the humanity, washed over them in waves. And in that instant, the story of ice cream and Coca-Cola in an American prison camp reached its narrative apex, delivering a suspenseful, unforgettable hook that compels the audience to pause, reflect, and marvel at the extraordinary intersection of kindness, psychology, and human resilience, ensuring that the impact of this remarkable experience lingers far beyond the immediate narrative, leaving a lasting imprint on memory, perception, and understanding. And as the final lines of this chapter in history resonate, the audience is left captivated, engaged, and profoundly moved, recognizing that even in the most constrained and unexpected circumstances, the deliberate combination of generosity, structure, and psychological insight can produce moments of wonder, transformation, and enduring suspense, a lesson that echoes through time, imagination, and the extraordinary story of humanity itself.